The perfect flat was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to fix what felt broken. But standing in those empty rooms, surrounded by dreams that weren't mine, the truth became impossible to ignore. A bigger kitchen wouldn't heal the way her words cut. More space wouldn't stop the cycle of apologies and silence. Signing those papers meant sacrificing the last pieces of myself. And for the first time, walking away felt like the bravest choice. I always thought I was good at making decisions. Deliberate, thoughtful choices that mapped out a sensible future. Then I found myself staring at mortgage paperwork for a flat I wasn't sure I wanted, with a woman I wasn't sure I should be with, signing away years of my life with a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. How do you tell someone you love that you've been nodding along to their dreams while silently counting down the days until the next argument? The way of pretending had become unbearable, but somehow, the truth seemed worse. Our apartment never felt like home. 2 years of living together, and still we arranged our belongings like temporary guests. She hated everything about it. The thin walls that carried our neighbors' conversations into our bedroom, the perpetually broken heating system, the landlord who never fixed anything. I hated only one thing, how those 4 walls seemed to magnify every flaw in our relationship until there was nowhere to hide from them. Looking back, I can see we were both right about different things. The flat was making her miserable. The constant background stress of subpar living conditions was fraying her nerves, making her reactions sharper, less measured. She wasn't wrong about that. But I wasn't wrong either when I sensed something deeper beneath our conflicts, something a nicer kitchen and an extra bedroom wouldn't fix. Still, I tried to believe. After 2.5 years together, most of it spent in varying states of conflict and reconciliation, I developed a pattern: avoid the argument at all costs, then apologize profusely when that failed. It was easier than addressing what was really happening between us, that fundamental disconnect that made simple conversations feel like navigating a minefield. When she started talking about buying a place together, I nodded along while my insides twisted with doubt. I told myself I was being practical, responsible even. We needed to fix our communication issues before committing to a mortgage. We needed to go at least a month without a screaming match before signing 30 years of our lives away together. But I never said that plainly. Instead, I deflected, delayed, deferred. Then came the perfect flat. 2 bedrooms, reasonable price point, in an area we both liked. I went along to the viewing, trying to ignore the warning bells sounding in my head. I smiled at the right moments, asked appropriate questions about council tax and service charges. I spoke about when we move in instead of if, because that's what supportive partners do, right? They get on board. They share the dream. For 5 whole days I tried to convince myself. I ran numbers on spreadsheets. I researched neighborhoods. I pictured us hosting dinner parties in that open-plan kitchen. I imagined all our problems dissolving in the glow of new beginnings, like moving would somehow reset us to factory settings. But beneath it all was that sinking feeling, the knowledge that I was building elaborate fantasies on crumbling foundations. When I finally admitted my doubts, the reaction was nuclear. We were in our kitchen, another irony, since kitchens were where we always seemed to have our worst fights. Something about standing on opposite sides of that narrow galley space, trapped between countertops with nowhere to retreat. "I don't think I can do this," I said, voice barely audible over the kettle coming to boil. The flat. It's not that I don't want to someday, but I'm not ready. Not yet. The silence that followed was brief, but absolute. Then came the storm, accusations hurled across the linoleum like grenades. Weak. Pathetic. Manipulative. Why? Liar. Each word found its mark with precision, each one cutting deeper than the last. I stood frozen, watching her transform from the woman I loved into someone I didn't recognize, someone whose rage seemed to consume the oxygen in the room. "How could you let me believe this was happening?" she screamed, slamming cabinet doors. "You've wasted my time. You've wasted years of my life." When she stormed out and called me later that night, her voice was cold with controlled fury. "I feel bad for the next person you date," she said, each word enunciated with crystal clarity. "You never deserved me anyway." The ultimatum came next, the flat or breakup. Just like that, our relationship had been reduced to a real estate transaction. I wondered how we'd arrived here, how love had curdled into this bitter transactional thing. That night, alone in bed, I replayed her words. The accusations of manipulation felt particularly unfair. Wasn't I just trying to be supportive? Wasn't I trying to overcome my own reservations rather than shutting down her dreams? But another voice whispered that perhaps she was right. Perhaps agreeing half-heartedly was worse than honest opposition. Perhaps I had been cowardly, taking the path of least resistance, until I couldn't anymore. I fell asleep, wondering if this was the end of us, and more disturbingly, feeling a flicker of relief at the thought. Somehow, we didn't break up. Somehow, we found ourselves back at the flat for a second viewing the following week. The estate agent chatted amiably about original features and natural light, oblivious to the charged silence between us, to the invisible bruises we were both still nursing from that explosive fight. Standing in what could be our future living room, I tried to feel something definitive, either excitement or dread, but found only numbness. I nodded at appropriate moments, made the right noises of appreciation. I was going through the motions, telling myself this was what adults did. They compromise, they moved forward, they built lives together even when things weren't perfect. My partner seemed different this time, subdued but determined. She pointed out spots for bookshelves, discussed potential color schemes. It was as if she decided to pretend our fight had never happened, that my doubts had never been voiced. Or perhaps she had simply decided that her dream of homeownership outweighed any concerns about the health of our relationship. Walking through those rooms a second time, I felt a strange splitting inside me. Part of me was genuinely excited. This could be good. This could be the fresh start we needed. The master bedroom had an ensuite bathroom. The second bedroom could be my office. The kitchen had enough space for us both to cook without bumping elbows. Rational, practical benefits that I couldn't deny. Yet underneath ran that current of doubt. Would a nicer flat really solve our communication problems? Would having more space stop the cycle of arguments, apologies, temporary peace, then arguments again? Or would we just be bringing our dysfunction into a more expensive setting, one we couldn't easily escape if things fell apart? More disturbing was the memory of her words during our fight. Weak, pathetic, disappointing. Those weren't the words of someone who respected their partner. They were weapons meant to wound, to diminish. Could I really commit to 30 years of financial entanglement with someone who, when angry enough, saw me that way? Who thought so little of me in those moments of conflict? That night, I couldn't sleep. Our relationship played on repeat in my mind, a highlight reel of our worst moments. The pattern was always the same, tension building over days, erupting in an argument where my failures were enumerated in excruciating detail, followed by my apologies and promises to do better. Peace for a while, then the cycle beginning again. I thought about the reasons we'd stayed together despite this. The good times were genuinely good. We shared interests, made each other laugh, had chemistry that could still make my heart race after 2 years. When things were smooth between us, I could glimpse the future we might have, comfortable, companionable, occasionally passionate. But those glimpses were becoming rarer, briefer. Increasingly, I found myself walking on eggshells, monitoring my words, my tone, my facial expressions, trying to avoid triggering another explosion. It was exhausting, this constant vigilance. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt truly relaxed in my own home. And now we were considering buying a place together. A legal, financial commitment that would bind us for years, possibly decades. If leaving now seemed complicated, leaving after purchasing property together would be exponentially more so. What kept me up wasn't just doubt about the flat. It was doubt about myself, about my judgment. Had I been blind to red flags? Was I too weak to stand up for myself? Or was I overreacting to normal relationship conflicts? Was I the problem, too sensitive, too hesitant, too unwilling to fully commit? Perhaps the worst question, was I staying out of love or out of fear? Fear of being alone, of starting over, of admitting I'd invested years in something that wasn't working. Fear of hurting someone I cared about, even as that person sometimes hurt me in ways that felt unforgivable. I never told my friends the full extent of our arguments. I shared sanitized versions. We had a disagreement about the flat that masked the true intensity. But they saw through me anyway. My oldest friend had been giving me concerned looks for months. "You don't seem happy," he said during a rare night out without my partner. "Every time I ask about her, you get this look on your face, like you're bracing for impact." I brushed it off, made a joke about real estate stress. But his words stayed with me. Another friend was more direct. "Does she always talk to you like that?" This, after witnessing a relatively mild exchange, where my partner had dismissed my opinion about a restaurant choice with a cutting remark about my usual indecisiveness. I had been embarrassed, quickly changing the subject. But now I wondered what they saw that I couldn't or wouldn't. My sister, too, had been dropping hints. "Relationships shouldn't be this hard," she said once, after I'd confided about a particularly draining argument. "Fighting sometimes is normal. Fighting all the time isn't." I had defended us then, explained about the stress of the tiny flat, about our different communication styles. But those justifications were wearing thin, even to my own ears. These whispers from people who loved me created a counterweight to the narrative I'd been telling myself, that our problems were situational, temporary, fixable with a change of scenery. What if they weren't? What if this was just who we were together? Alone in our flat one afternoon while my partner was at work, I finally admitted to myself what I'd been avoiding. I wasn't happy. I hadn't been happy for a long time. And buying a flat together wouldn't change that fundamental truth. The realization didn't come as a lightning bolt, but as a slow, sad acknowledgement of something I'd known in my bones for months. Perhaps even years. Something I'd been trying to outrun with compromises and peacekeeping and endless apologies. Our relationship had become a battle for control, disguised as a search for compromise. Each argument followed the same script. Her frustration, my defensiveness, her escalation, my eventual surrender. Each time, I gave a little more ground, adjusted my needs and wants a little further, in the name of keeping peace. The flat was just the latest battlefield. She wanted certainly. I needed more time. But voicing that need had become almost impossible within the dynamics we'd established. Easier to go along, to nod and smile and hope for the best, than to face another explosion of rage. That afternoon, sitting in our too small living room, surrounded by the accumulated evidence of our life together, I faced another truth. The way she spoke to me during arguments wasn't okay. It wasn't just the heat of the moment or stress talking. It was a fundamental lack of respect. And I had been allowing it, normalizing it, for far too long. I thought about November when the flat would be ready and tried to imagine our life there. Would the additional space and nicer amenities really change the way we communicated? Would ownership suddenly transform our dynamics? Or would we simply have more expensive arguments in a better postcode? The answer felt obvious once I allowed myself to consider it honestly. Nothing would change because the problem wasn't our living situation. The problem was use. Two people locked in unhealthy patterns, bringing out the worst in each other despite our best intentions. In the days that followed, I tried to calculate the cost of staying versus the cost of leaving. An impossible equation with too many variables, too many unknowns. Staying meant financial security, shared expenses, not having to start over in my late 20s when it seemed everyone around me was settling down. It meant keeping the good parts of us, the inside jokes, the familiar routines, the physical comfort of a body I knew, as well as my own. But staying also meant accepting that this was as good as it would get. That the arguments would continue, perhaps become less frequent with more space, but never truly disappear. That I would continue walking on eggshells, carefully monitoring my words and actions to avoid setting off landmines. That when those inevitable explosions came, I would again be weak, pathetic, disappointing. Leaving meant uncertainty. Financial strain. Loneliness. The complicated logistics of disentangling two lives. The judgment of friends and family who would want explanations. The daunting prospect of dating again, of opening myself up to someone new. But leaving also meant the possibility of peace. Of a home that felt like a sanctuary rather than a battlefield. Of a relationship built on mutual respect rather than power struggles. Of rediscovering the person I was before I started shrinking myself to avoid conflict. I thought about calling off the flat purchase immediately, but something held me back. The tiny hope that maybe I was wrong. That maybe the new place really would solve our problems. That maybe, with more space and less external stress, we could find our way back to the people we were at the beginning. Or perhaps it was just cowardice, the same avoidance that had led me to this point. Easier to keep moving forward than to make a definitive break. Easier to hope than to act. It came unexpectedly, as clarity often does. We were discussing bathroom tiles for the new flat. Such a mundane thing when I mentioned liking a particular style. My partner dismissed it immediately, rolling her eyes at my terrible taste. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it, with casual contempt, as if my preferences weren't just different but inherently inferior. As if I were a child whose opinions could be dismissed without consideration. In that moment, with startling clarity, I saw our future together. Years of these small dismissals accumulating like drops of water on stone, gradually eroding my sense of self until I became exactly what she accused me of being: weak, indecisive, pathetic. I saw myself at 40, at 50, having surrendered so many small parts of myself that I'd become unrecognizable. I saw arguments that never fundamentally changed because the underlying dynamics remained the same. Her need to control, my instinct to appease. I saw us in that beautiful new flat, with its spacious rooms and modern kitchen, having the exact same fights we'd been having for years. The setting would be different, but the script would be identical. And suddenly, with perfect clarity, I knew I couldn't do it. Not the flat. Not the relationship. Not any of it. The certainty was terrifying, but also freeing. For the first time in months, maybe years, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I waited until evening, until we were both home and the distractions of the day had fallen away. I made tea, a small ritual of normalcy before upending everything. "We need to talk about the flat," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "And about us." Her expression shuddered immediately, prepared for battle. But this time, I wasn't going to be derailed by anger or intimidated by threats. This time, I had found my voice. "I've been trying to convince myself that moving will fix our problems," I continued. "But I don't think it will. I think we'll just be taking our issues to a new address." She started to interrupt, but I pressed on. "Please, let me finish. This is important." And then I told her everything, about the walking on eggshells, about how her words, during arguments, cut deeper than she perhaps realized, about how I'd lost myself in trying to keep the peace, about how I couldn't imagine 30 years of financial entanglement when we couldn't go 30 days without a major conflict. I told her I deserved someone who didn't think me weak or pathetic, even in moments of anger. That she deserved someone who could give her what she wanted without such deep reservations. Her reaction cycled through the expected stages: denial, anger, bargaining. She accused me of blindsiding her, though we both knew that wasn't true. The signs had been there for anyone willing to see them. "We can work on it," she said, tears finally replacing anger. "We can get counseling, find better ways to communicate. We don't have to throw everything away." Her words touched something in me, the part that still loved her, that remembered better times. For a moment, I wavered. Maybe we could fix this. Maybe with professional help, with both of us fully committed to change. But then I remembered all the previous promises, all the temporary improvements that never lasted. I remembered the fundamental incompatibility in how we handled conflict, in what we expected from partnership. "I think it's too late," I said gently. "I think we've been trying to force something that doesn't work naturally. And I'm tired of fighting, not just with you, but with myself, with the voice inside that's been telling me this isn't right." The conversation lasted hours, circling through the same points, excavating years of accumulated hurts and misunderstandings. It was excruciating but also necessary, the first completely honest exchange we'd had in longer than I could remember. Breaking up when you live together is a special kind of hell, a drawn-out goodbye enacted over weeks of practical decisions. Who keeps the couch? Who calls the utility companies? Which friends belong to whom in the division of social assets? We agreed that I would move out first, finding a small studio while she stayed in our current place until her lease renewal. We divided our possessions with surprising civility, though each object carried memories that made the process painful. The hardest part was canceling our involvement with the new flat. There were apologetic emails to estate agents, awkward phone calls explaining our change of circumstances, a financial penalty for withdrawing our interest so late in the process. It felt like failure, like admitting defeat. But with each step of disentanglement came increasing certainty that I had made the right decision. The relief I felt was my body's way of confirming what my mind had finally accepted. This relationship had been slowly suffocating both of us. There were moments of doubt, of course. Late nights when loneliness felt like a physical presence in my new empty studio. Mornings when I reached across the bed for a body that wasn't there. Social events where friends ask careful questions, their concern thinly disguised as casual interest. But there was also rediscovery. I found myself making decisions without second-guessing, choosing restaurants and films and weekend activities without the constant calculation of potential conflict. I reconnected with friends I unconsciously distanced because my partner didn't like them. I remembered interests and hobbies I'd set aside in the name of compromise. Most importantly, I found silence. Not the tense silence of unspoken arguments, but the peaceful quiet of a mind no longer constantly strategizing to maintain peace. My small studio, despite its limitations, never echoed with screaming matches or simmering resentments. It became my sanctuary, the first true home I'd had in years. 6 months later, I ran into my ex-partner at a mutual friends gathering. The initial awkwardness gave way to a brief, surprisingly genuine conversation. She had found another flat, smaller than the one we'd considered, but entirely hers. She seemed lighter somehow, more herself. "I've been seeing someone," she mentioned casually. "It's early days, but it's good. Different." I nodded, genuinely happy for her. "I'm glad." "I've also been talking to someone," she added, and I understood she meant professionally. "About communication, about how I handle conflict. It's been enlightening." There was no dramatic reconciliation, no sudden realization that we'd made a terrible mistake in separating. Just two people who once loved each other acknowledging that sometimes love isn't enough. That sometimes the bravest choice is walking away from something that doesn't work, no matter how much you wish it did. Walking home that night, I thought about foundations, how we build our lives on the choices we make, how those choices must be solid enough to support whatever structures we create upon them. My ex and I had been trying to build something permanent on shifting ground, on fault lines of incompatibility we'd tried to ignore. I thought about the flat that wasn't meant to be ours, wondering who lived there now. I hoped they were happy there, that their walls contained laughter more often than shouting, that they felt at home in ways we never would have. Most of all, I thought about how endings can also be beginnings, how sometimes the hardest decisions create space for unexpected possibilities, how choosing myself wasn't selfish but necessary, the first step toward building something authentic and sustainable. I don't know what my future holds. Perhaps another relationship, perhaps not. Perhaps another attempt at homeownership, perhaps years of renting. But whatever foundations I build next will be solid, constructed from honesty, self-knowledge, and the courage to walk away from anything that diminishes rather than enhances my life. Some might call that weak or disappointing. I call it the strongest thing I've ever done.